Please welcome Matthew Dionne from Constant Contact.
That's my boy. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Your presence here means a lot because even I wanted to go to Bree's talk on the marketing track. That looks super cool. But this is an atomic email design that scales. And I'm sure that you guys are wondering if this clicker would work. There we go. Who is this guy? So my name is Matt Dionne. I'm a principal template engineer at Constant Contact. I've been with them for 10 years. I actually started on the phones in Tier 1 support, answering customers' questions about their email and about the Constant Contact product. And I'm not up here alone. The only reason I'm up here is from the generous support and mentorship of my awesome coworkers and this very community that's in this room right now. We share a bunch of stuff and we teach each other, and that's why I'm able to be up here today. So I want to tell you guys a little story about a project we've been working on at Constant Contact. I think it's one that relates really well to the group that's here. I believe the challenges that we face are many of the challenges that the people in this room face. And I think that the process that we went through and the outcome will hopefully be helpful to you. So what was the problem that we were trying to solve? The problem was a scaling problem. We have about 200 email templates at Constant Contact, over 1,000 custom partner templates. And our build process of using snippets, partials, boilerplates, frameworks, we tried everything. It just wasn't scaling. It wasn't cutting it anymore. So we went about and needed to create something new. And the challenges that we faced are the same challenges that everyone in this room faced to begin with. The Email Geek Challenge. Email clients are ever changing. According to Litmus, between April and June of this year, there was an email client update equivalent to every 2 days. So things are coming in fast and furious, and we need to be able to keep these things up to date. Companies are just generally sending more email. The volume is up, and more is expected of Email Geek teams. Email content is increasingly dynamic. Building something and then sending the same content to your entire list is literally forever ago. It's not something that we're able to do. And then email campaigns are living longer. So the process of building something and then sending it and then not having to worry about it anymore because it's already out in the inboxes, those days are gone. You build something, you set it up, and then it gets sent with triggers, with automation, and with all of these things, and those campaigns can live around a long time. And then also, as we all know, email code takes a unique set of skills. And so those are the challenges. On top of those challenges that we all face, there's some unique challenges for an email geek working for an ESP. I know there's probably a few in the crowd here. When working for an ESP, we've got an email editor that sits on top of our email code. That editor needs to allow the customer to put in their brand and content, manipulate layouts, and the more features that those editors build in, the more flexible and robust our code needs to be. We also have an increased burden of maintenance on those templates because every customer, when they go to a template picker, expects that markup that's going to be in that email is going to be the latest and greatest, always up to date. And so we need to make sure that those templates, which live around for a long time, are able to get those changes. And then another unique thing with making templates for an ESP is that they have to support any number of brands. So theme information and things like that need to be flexible. If you work for a single company or a handful of companies doing emails, you can build those brands right into your templates. With an ESP, you have to make sure that the flexibility is built in to allow any brands to be built in. And the same goes with layout variations. With a smaller set of templates, you can have like a smaller set of layouts, but with an ESP and those flexibilities of the email editor, you need to make sure those layouts are flexible too. And then we've got, on top of those, we've got constant contacts challenges. So a little, hashtag real talk here. We have so many editors. It's like a hobby at Constant Contact of just spinning up new editors. Luckily, this is something that we're finally breaking the engineering teams out of. But a lot of these editors, they don't have a clear migration path. The editors were built first in some cases, and then the email templates were retrofitted after the fact, which is another level of nightmare that I won't share today. And then with these, the storage models, they all contain the markup, the styles, and the structure all together. The editing was not API accessible. You can, through Constant Contact's API, take a whole HTML file and send it through our syndication. But if you had a campaign that you've already created, there was no way that you'd be able to edit that via the API because it wasn't in a data-friendly format. It's just straight HTML, which is kind of hard. So a common workflow nowadays kind of looks something like this. You have a system of snippets. There's a process. This is obviously super simplified, but there's a process that produces HTML. There's a database that interacts with that HTML, replacing variables and making things dynamic for content and contact information, and then the email gets sent. At Constant Contact, we had a similar workflow. We just have an editor that is kind of in the middle of that process, but it was the same idea. We were taking snippets, we were using a build process to create HTML. That HTML just got more and more complicated over time, building in more variables and things like that to make sure our editors were capable of editing it. And then there's still a database that sits out there with contact information and content information that you would need to be put into it. So what did we do? We needed to get to work. We decided that we needed to build a new templating system, and so we took on that project. But before we got to work, we identified some core concepts that we would need to build into the system. The concepts are atomic design, separation of the content, markup, theme, and layout, and then obviously code reuse. So let's take a look at each of those concepts a little bit in detail. So atomic design, this is something by Brad Frost. I know it's been publicized on the internet quite a bit, and there's been a bunch of talks on it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's essentially breaking down a system into its smallest possible parts and then reassembling them into larger collections to form new structures and layouts. So you have atoms at the smallest level that get grouped into molecules, grouped into organisms, etc. In email world, what that looked like was in the atoms, we would have like your body, your container, rows, columns, buttons and text and things like that. Those atoms would get grouped into molecules, which would be your articles, product blocks, your logo and social signatures. And then those organisms would be grouped into like headers, body, footer, templates, generic level, cards, newsletters, announcements, and then you would assemble those into like new products, the May 2020 newsletter, org changes, and things like that. So next, this is a pretty simple concept, but it was something that was core to the system, is we needed to keep the content, the markup, the theme, and the layout separate. Separating these things out, we were able to replace any of the pieces on the fly without a bunch of heavy lifting or dependencies. And so if you start with one template and you want to choose a different theme, a branded theme or a holiday theme, you should be able to swap that out. If you wanted to choose a different layout, a card layout, newsletter layout, you should be able to do those things without affecting the content or the markup, and vice versa. And then the last concept is code reuse. It's the holy grail of software engineering. If you're going to write it twice, you want to make it so that the code gets reused. In email, it goes from and not even just twice, it's like hundreds or thousands of times because those emails get sent out a bunch. So we want to make sure that if we wrote a bulletproof button, and we want to make sure that that exact code was used everywhere, so that we weren't writing that over and over into different structures. So we had our concepts, And then now what we wanted to do is we wanted to identify the tools that we were going to use to put this together. So we chose Mustache and JSON. These are very well established and technologies. They're simple at their core, but provide the depth that we needed for the project. Mustache, some of you are probably familiar, is a logic list templating system. It's called logic list because there are no if statements, else clauses, or for loops. Instead, there are only tags. Some tags get replaced with a value, some tags get replaced with nothing, and then others with a series of values. JSON is another thing that's widely available and used, and it is a lightweight data interchange format that is easy for humans to read and write, which is good because us humans need to read and write this stuff for the templates in the system. And then it's also easy for machines to parse and generate, which is good for the APIs and the editor and things like that. So what did we build? The output is a two-file system is what we settled on. There's the template and the document. Both of these are completely written in JSON. The template is basically your bag of parts. It's going to contain all of your markup, your CSS, your defaults for style, configuration, and content. The second piece is the document, which is at its core is trying to be the bare minimum of information that it can be. So it relies on the template for all of its defaults. And what it is it's a definition of the layout and content or reference to the content. And it's all written in JSON. So you might be thinking that this two-file system doesn't look very atomic. You know, you've got all of this information all in these two files, and that's where the build process came in. So what we did is the template is composed of the atomic pieces. Each of these we call a component. Each of these components is an NPM module that gets compiled. Each of these exists separately in the template. So I'll show examples of what the template code looks like. But you'll see each of these listed out in the template. You could go into the template and write all of this stuff in individually. But with the build process and with the NPM modules, we were able to use package.json to manage the dependencies. Each of these modules is semantically versioned, and so we can make sure that all of the requirements and dependencies are built out that way. So at the top level of the template, this is the JSON that you'll see here. We have 6 top-level keys. Underneath each of these keys, you'll see all of the atomic component names again. So each of those, you'll see that repeated in each of them. The top level here, the first key is components. Components contain the defaults and the variables that modify each of them directly. The files contain all of the markup and the CSS. The theme and the styles are, the two go hand in hand. We actually built a layer on top of the styles so that we could drive a larger set of changes with a smaller set of variables. So the style directly drives the CSS, and then the theme drives the styles. We also built in a schema. So this is actually your save validation and your build validation directly built into the template because this is JSON. So we could say, if you're modifying a button width, that it's going to be an integer, and so you can't write in words in there. Or actually, with the button specifically, you could say it could be an integer or a string. So you can say that this is with auto or with 100%. And so you can build that validation directly in there. So as you're writing these templates and you're saving, you can get that feedback right away that you're missing something or something's not right. And then the default content is all stored in a locale. So if you wanted to replace, do language substitutions, that's done with the locale key. So getting back into, diving one level further, you see all of the atomic component names. Each one has its own section. If we dive into one of those sections, you'll see that in the container component, I've got the width set to 600, the background is white, the text content says hello world, and these are just the defaults that are stored solely in the template. Now, if we flip over to the files section, you'll see the same atomic name here of the container. And inside each of these is the HTML. And now this is where the mustache comes into play. All of the markup in CSS is stored as a string with mustache variables throughout it. One of the great things about mustache is you can leverage sections to keep your markup, your output that gets sent out the door really clean. So in the top example here, there's a table width. Now let's say that width resolves to nothing because you didn't need to put a width on this particular element. You would still have an empty width attribute. Using a section, which is the example at the bottom there, if the width is not included, then the entire attribute does not resolve. So it keeps everything very clean. You're not left with a bunch of empty attributes within your system. Another thing you'll notice here is that underneath the atomic level container there is the files are actually in a separate email key. So I'm actually going to touch on that a little bit later, but that's something interesting to take a look at. All right, so generally that's the bag of parts, that's the template, but it doesn't do much good because it's just its default until you provide it with a structure, and that's where the document comes in. The document again is, that's one slide too far. The document again contains a definition of the layout, a content or the reference to the content, and only the bare minimum of data. So these things are as light as possible. We keep it as light as possible in case we need to do any maintenance, we need to change keys and stuff like that. There's fewer places that we're going to have to find to do that manipulation. With JSON, it can be a nested structure. You can see that each of these is nested in an array. Each component has children, and that's how you get your nesting. And then there's nothing being overridden in this example here. So this document is accepting all of the template's defaults as they are. Now, if we wanted to override that, what we would do is we would enter in the variables right into each of the components. And so with this, I'm setting the container to 1,000, which I know that's probably a bit much for email still, but setting that there. And then down in the content, you'll see that I'm overriding the default hello world, which you saw earlier with hello email geeks. So now the build flow looks something like this, where we've got the template and the JSON, and then that gets combined together and compiled with the mustache renderer. It takes the markup and the CSS from the files, the defaults from the template keys, and iterates over the document structure, replacing each of those keys with the HTML and CSS. So what does this solve for us? There are many benefits. One of them is that the documents can be more dynamic than ever. Being entirely JSON, it's very data friendly. The layout and the content can both be manipulated programmatically. So not only can your content database resolve a single paragraph, but it can safely inject a whole new article row with a paragraph, with heading, with an image, because it's all just JSON and it doesn't have to manipulate HTML anymore, which is a much more complicated structure. Another benefit is that these documents are evergreen. Because they're JSON and the output is actually separated from them, and when an email client's change, which they do a bunch, we can just change out the markup within the template and the document doesn't have to change at all. It doesn't even care what the markup is that's being rendered. You can just replace all of that stuff on the fly. The other nice thing about these things is that because the markup is separate, you can provide different sets of markup. So back in that example where we had the files section and it was nested under an email key, you can have an email key and an AMP key and a web key, and then the renderer can just request those different file types, and the document doesn't care. It's just like, yep, I have all my information that I need. The template does the stuff that it needs to do. And so with this one template and document structure, you can output a regular email, or you can output an AMP email, or even a landing page if you need to, without any changes being needed in the document itself. The The CSS is referenced, but it also can be customized programmatically. So this is a difference between a snippet or a partial that we had been using before, where a partial was something that you can reference, but then you couldn't manipulate it once it was pulled in. With these, you can reference them and then override the things that you need to about it. And then again, the multiple sets of markup can be added for doing different types of structures and things like that. So a new email build flow would look something like this, where you've got your document and your template, your database, your editor, whatever you have, interfaces directly with the document itself, and then nothing gets rendered until it gets time to be sent. And so you do your manipulation of your document with your database, and then that stuff gets sent to the renderer, which outputs the HTML, and then sends on the fly. Apparently I talked really fast. I still have 10 minutes left. So that's about it. There's definitely a whole lot more that went into this, but I wanted to just kind of give a high level of what we had done. If you do have questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter and LinkedIn, email, and if you want to catch me at the Ask an Expert, I've got keychains with the nice little rocket logo on there. Cool.